Hi everyone, today Adriana and I will be interviewing Erin-Kate Escobar. Erin-Kate is a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist who has experience working within STEM education. We are so excited to talk to them more and learn about their experiences with empowering women in STEM. So let's go meet them.
I'm Erin-Kate Escobar. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I am currently a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant.
Could you tell us what brought you to this field?
I wanted more places and spaces to be places where people could show up as their whole self. And I know that when I found those places, which wasn't really until college, that after getting to experience a space where I got to bring all of my identities and all of the knowledge that I knew to the table and have it be validated, I knew I wanted to create more spaces for other people to be able to do that as well, and that all those years of maybe hiding or feeling like it wasn't valued or feeling like I didn't know how to present it brought me to be really passionate about how do we get to create this for more people.
Could you define what DEI is and why that sort of work is important within STEM?
We use DEI short term, right? For diversity, equity, inclusion, making things more accessible, integrating justice into our organizations. Sometimes you see JEDI or READY, how are we talking about race, ethnicity, diversity, and inclusion in all of these places? What are we doing right now and in our workplaces and where we go to school and where we intern to think about how, if these places weren't originally created by or for everyone, we're gonna have to make some changes that make it a place where everyone can exist, and not just exist, but hopefully thrive and be nurtured and grow. STEM is one of those places that kind of was untouched for a long time because it was seen as this very objective place of people who were not biased because they were using scientific evidence to fight that. And then we've learned, right, that we all have bias. If we are working within our current system that is reinforcing racism, we are probably reinforcing racist ways of being without even trying. That's the yucky part. I don't have to try. If I just operate as every day I do because that's the way we do it, I'm probably perpetuating some aspect of that I don't mean to.
Could you provide a specific example or just talk a little bit more about how people and organizations within STEM can incorporate and center DEI into their work?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion work can be everybody's work. It doesn't have to be in our job title. It doesn't have to be something that's, those people do that and I do this. We really can integrate it into how we can speak up on behalf of people, colleagues, who's not in this room right now. We get invited to be on a panel and we ask who's going to be on the panel with us, and then we notice, oh, there's no people of color on this panel with us. How can I just reflect that back to the group and say, I want to make sure that people of color are represented on this panel. So sometimes that's saying, why can't we add more people to the panel? So how can we both speak up? How can we amplify the voices of people around us who are already sharing their knowledge and sharing their experiences? And then how do we build coalitions and build support and build groups that we can together advocate for the needs of intersectional women physicists or queer biologists, whatever it is we need, those intersections of we're maybe not being seen, something about our experiences being left out, but if we come together, we build community, we can get multiple perspectives and think about okay, let's figure out how do we ask for this, work with our administration, work with the people to make those changes.
What kinds of projects are you currently working on?
My current work right now is actually supporting a couple different organizations with fellowship programs they want to create, and thinking about what are the questions you ask on an application to get a cohort of fellows that is from all over the United States, from all different religious backgrounds, from all different ethnic backgrounds, from all different racial backgrounds. It's never enough to say we have one of this and one of this and one of this in the room. That doesn't solve the diversity problem, right? How do each of us and how do each of those applicants apply their knowledge and the way that they experience the world to the problem we're trying to solve? So it's really trying to help organizations think about what are the questions we ask to both allow applicants to share with us what they can bring and the perspective that they're taking, and give our applicants the power to choose what they disclose, right? To like not necessarily have to go down a checklist and be like, oh great, I mark all the boxes. Let's think about how do we really holistically ask for, screen, and then create a really holistic process that we're going to be really transparent about, so people know, as I answer these questions, how am I going to be judged on it?
Do you have any personal experiences that you feel comfortable talking about that influence the work you do within DEI?
When I went away to college, I had the privilege to go to a 4-year university, and I started kind of coming into my own around like, what does it mean to be mixed race? So I'm white and I'm Latinx. I identified all over the LGBTQ spectrum. I was like, am I a lesbian? Am I bisexual? Am I gay? Am I trans? And so I picked this word queer because it felt like all encompassing of like an identity and a group I could belong to, that I didn't necessarily have to like tell you who I was romantically or sexually attracted to that day, but that like I belong to somewhere and some group, and we are actively advocating for our success and well-being. So being like that queer, mixed race, person of color, I now identify as non-binary, to add another identity to that. I also have like Catholic and Jewish family. I definitely thought growing up I could be half and half. Like I was like, if I'm half white and half Latino, can't I be half Catholic and half Jewish? And so coming into that own of like, how do I hold these multiple intersecting identities, all of which maybe fall outside of this like white, cis, heteronormative, Christian, able-bodied, right-handed world. There's a lot of identities that go into, right? Like, how do we just move through the world, and if we don't have that different experience, we don't notice it. It's just not hard for us. It's just not something I come up against. If you've never had to like swipe your credit card with your right hand because that's the side it's on, because I'm a left-handed person, you know, like you're just not thinking about why a machine, I think they changed them, so like now you swipe across the top. It's just a change in perspective that's like, oh, okay, I don't have to necessarily hold this with my left hand and go like this if that's my dominant hand. And like that's about hands. So I take that example and it just goes into like, how many personal experiences do we have to have with coming up against a barrier, coming up against prejudice, coming up against bias, coming up against sexual harassment, coming up against somebody not treating us well, that then teach us like, oh, okay, I want to go about this in a different way.
Could you tell us a little bit more about some of like your specific experiences working with DEI in STEM?
I specifically worked at a STEM specific school for the last 5 years, and that was really focused on how do we support kind of like education about diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, justice. How do we support structural shifts that departments can make, that our institution can make? And then how do we empower and give people the skills to ask for what it is that they need to be successful? So what did that actually look like? That looked like a robust option of like workshops that people could sign up for. So just like on a regular basis, you could be learning about what are these popular words or keywords or trendy words happening. You know, diversity is now kind of meaningless unless you like dig into like, what do you mean by diverse? So creating like a normalized space where we get to talk about what these words mean and associations with them, and how do we understand them more complexly so we can use them at the appropriate times, at the appropriate place to really mean something, and not just kind of like blanket terminology, this is inclusive. That also looked like helping with structural changes in each division, in every area. How do we think about admitted student visit days differently? How do we think about who has access to conferences and professional development money? How do we think about even our speaker series on campus? Like, who's coming? Who's invited? How much do they get paid? Who's in charge of all of these pieces? Do we have access in our building to a single stalled restroom that anyone can use? Does everyone know where that is? And then the third way that happened, I got to do in my role was a lot of like women's mentoring. I ran a group called a Women's Engagement Board, which was women in every single division who wanted to engage in advocacy and change and understanding better how they could advocate for the success of women in STEM. And so that was separate for chemists, separate for neurobiologists, separate for physicists, from our mathematicians. Like every division and every group had a slightly different thing that they were advocating for. And so it was so cool to create a coalition where all those groups met on like a monthly or quarterly basis to gain skills, and how do we curate our stories to be powerful? My dream is that we cultivate that ability to say, oh, like as somebody who experienced harassment in most of my jobs, every job except for my last job, it was like, oh, how do I talk about the uncomfortable situations that I was in that then I either found a way out of, coalition build, find other people who had experienced that same thing with those same people, reporting that and what had been effective about that, what had not been effective about that, talking to that person and what that experience was like of confronting someone around the way that they were talking to me or the way they were treating me, and just normalizing that wherever we go, these isms exist and we're going to be confronted with them. So let's figure out, like, how do we coach each other and support each other in figuring out how do we get through that and be really successful at it and thrive through these really challenging things, because it's like these huge systemic injustices that are being perpetuated on an interpersonal level. And that's hard to solve for. And it sucks to be in those situations. And yet there's so many resources and there's so many ways we can support each other.
What do you think is the most rewarding part of your job?
Getting to see the ripple effects, right? So a tool that somebody takes away from a workshop or a conversation or a coaching session we have and is like changed, like sometimes it's flipping a switch and sometimes it's like whole perspective shift, or sometimes it's just like, oh, I just say this differently. Those little tiny things, but that have huge ripple effects that I won't ever know, the full impacts of, but I get to see at work in small ways where people are like, oh yeah, this is just normal. And I'm like, that's great. That's great. We want that to be that way. And when people feel like empowered to go do something, make a change, speak up for themselves, amplify a voice of somebody who they're like, yeah, make sure you listen to what they're saying. Anytime I hear those stories, I'm just like, my heart lights up. I feel so happy that people are taking in what they can from the challenges that we're facing and saying, yeah, okay, there's something I can do here.
Who would you consider your biggest role model or inspiration to be?
The one that actually comes to me immediately when you ask me this question today, which isn't always my go-to, is our United Farm Workers movement. I think about how Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, we weren't providing bathrooms to people who work in the fields. Something that feels really basic. And so I like to remind people, and I have to remind myself in this work, that because of the system we're working within, people aren't looking out for your basic needs. And we have to ask for those. And sometimes it feels like we're asking too much, or I'm being too specific, or I have too many needs. How can I exist here if this basic thing to me is not being met, but isn't seen as basic to somebody else? And so I feel like I harness this inspiration from this movement that, believe me, we still have a long way to go to treat farm workers and our essential workers better. But they had to fight to say, we need bathrooms in the fields. A basic human need. And that really does inspire me. We have to fight for those basic human needs that we have in our spaces that haven't been given to us. The basic human need to feel human connection that we've just been told no, just be a robot and get through it. That's just how we're most effective in this world. And we have to say, whoa, I have some human needs here. I don't want to have to ask if I can express. I just want it to be okay that I'm expressing that it's a complicated day today. And I'm holding what's happening in the news, what happened on my ride here, what's happening tomorrow, this family or friend I'm going to connect with trying to accomplish this incredible task in front of me, right? I think people think that's too much to ask for. And I'm like, basic human needs. We have to ask for them. We have to advocate for them. We have to build coalitions. We have to show that it's not just one person's need. Actually makes a better situation for everyone if we get to come and be our full complex selves, and we're less tied to that we're on deadline, there's no time for human connection, because actually that human connection can make the difference between us making it to that deadline and being like, peace, I can't handle being a robot. I can't, only so many hours of the day.
Finally, what advice would you give to people who want to become scientists?
Cultivate practices and the things that you need to be your best self.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Erin-Kate, for talking with us today. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, and make sure to subscribe for new content every week. Bye, everyone.